Your soulmate wants to share what happened that night. Listen until the end. Something slipped through the silence that night, and your soulmate has been carrying it ever since. Not because they wanted to hide it, but because they couldn't find the right moment to tell you what really unfolded after the world around them had finally gone quiet. Imagine a dimly lit street where the last few lights still glowed against the evening sky. Picture someone standing completely still, holding a phone they almost used a dozen times before placing it back into their pocket. Why did they stop themselves? Who, or what, made them hesitate? The answer isn't what anyone expected. It began with one ordinary decision that slowly transformed into a memory they could never forget. Stay here, because one tiny detail from that evening changes the meaning of everything you're about to hear. They had gone out believing it would be another routine night, one that would disappear like every other evening before it. But as conversations faded and familiar faces drifted away, something unusual happened. A simple question from a stranger lingered longer than it should have. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was almost invisible. Who is the first person you think about when everything becomes quiet? The room kept moving, music continued playing softly in the background, and people laughed without noticing the weight of that single sentence. Yet your soulmate couldn't answer immediately. They looked down. Smiled for just a second. Then the smile disappeared as if it had uncovered something buried much deeper than they ever intended to face. They walked outside into the cool night air, hoping the feeling would pass, but instead, every step only made one person clearer in their mind. Before you decide what that means, wait for the next piece, because something happened just moments later that even they never saw coming. As they continued walking beneath the glow of quiet streetlights, the world around them seemed strangely calm, almost as if time itself had slowed down to let one important realization catch up. They noticed little things they had ignored for months. The sound of distant traffic, a gentle breeze moving through the trees, reflections dancing across empty windows. Somehow, every ordinary moment pointed toward the same thought. They realized they had been measuring every new experience against memories connected to you without even knowing it. That discovery caught them completely off guard. Suddenly, they understood why certain places never felt complete, why exciting news always felt unfinished until they imagined sharing it, and why every celebration quietly carried the feeling that someone important was missing. But there is still one conversation from later that night they have never fully shared with anyone. When those words were finally spoken aloud, everything inside them shifted in a way that would shape every choice they made afterward. And that untold conversation is closer than you think. The quietest moments often carry the loudest truths, and what happened next unfolded in a place where almost no one was paying attention. Your soulmate eventually stepped into a small late-night cafe, more to gather their thoughts than to order anything at all. At that exact moment, an older couple sitting nearby quietly laughed together over the smallest joke. It wasn't a grand romantic scene. It was simple. Comfortable. Genuine. Watching that brief exchange stirred something unexpected deep inside your soulmate. They suddenly understood that the moments they wanted most weren't the extraordinary ones everyone posts about, they were the quiet evenings, the shared smiles, the conversations that lasted long after midnight. That realization settled into their heart with surprising clarity. Before you move on, Stay with this because the next discovery explains why they almost reached out to you before sunrise. And if this story is reminding you of someone special, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to someone who enjoys stories filled with mystery, hope, and heartfelt moments. There is still another layer hidden beneath this unforgettable night. Minutes later, they finally unlocked their phone. Your name was there, closer than ever, waiting inside a message box that remained completely blank. Their fingers hovered over the screen again and again. They started writing. Erased every word. Began another sentence. Deleted that one too. It wasn't because they had nothing to say. It was because every sentence sounded too small compared to what they were feeling. How do you explain that one ordinary evening suddenly revealed emotions you had been quietly carrying for months? How do you tell someone they became the answer to questions you didn't even know you were asking? The night grew quieter as the city slowly drifted toward sleep, yet your soulmate remained awake, replaying every conversation, every smile, every memory connected to you. Then another unexpected thought crossed their mind. What if timing wasn't about perfect circumstances? What if courage mattered more than certainty? That question refused to leave them. They looked up at the stars for a brief moment, took a slow breath, and almost pressed send. But another unexpected interruption appeared before they could make that choice, creating one more twist that neither of you could have predicted. As the first hints of dawn slowly painted the horizon with soft shades of blue and gold, your soulmate realized the night had quietly transformed them. They were no longer searching for an explanation, they were searching for the right beginning. They understood that some stories don't start with dramatic confessions but with silent promises made only to the heart. They promised themselves they would stop hiding behind uncertainty. They promised they would stop convincing themselves that meaningful connections simply fade away with time. Most importantly, they promised that if another opportunity appeared, they would not allow fear to make the decision for them. Yet the morning carried one final surprise. Before leaving, they noticed something small that most people would have ignored entirely, a simple reminder that instantly brought you back into their thoughts with remarkable clarity. That tiny moment felt almost like the missing piece of a puzzle they had been trying to solve all night. They stood there for several seconds, quietly smiling as everything finally began to make sense. But the most personal part of the story, the words they have wanted to tell you ever since that unforgettable night, has still not been revealed. Those words are waiting, and when they finally come to light, you'll understand why this night never truly ended for them. A single unexpected discovery changed the direction of the morning before the sun had fully claimed the sky. As your soulmate prepared to leave, they noticed a small notebook resting on a nearby windowsill where someone had forgotten it. They weren't searching for answers, yet one handwritten sentence visible on the open page quietly caught their attention. The people who matter most often don't know how deeply they are missed. They didn't touch the notebook. They simply stood there, reading those few words over and over as if they had arrived at exactly the right moment. A calm smile slowly replaced the uncertainty that had followed them throughout the night. It felt almost unbelievable that after hours of questioning every emotion, something so simple could bring everything into focus. They stepped outside, and the fresh morning air carried a strange sense of peace. For the first time in a long while, they stopped wondering whether they should think about you less. Instead, they began wondering why they had ever tried to. The answer quietly unfolded with every step they took. Every place they passed seemed connected to a memory. A bookstore reminded them of a conversation they wished had lasted longer. A quiet park brought back the image of laughter they could still hear in their mind. Even the sunrise seemed different because they found themselves wishing you could see it too. Stay with this for another moment, because what happened next revealed something even your soulmate had never admitted to themselves before. They realized this story wasn't about one unforgettable night anymore, it was about everything that night finally helped them understand. As the day slowly awakened around them, they made an unexpected decision that surprised even them. Instead of rushing home and letting the emotions fade, they chose to revisit places connected to moments they had quietly treasured. They paused outside a familiar cafe where they once imagined meeting you someday. They lingered near a quiet bridge where they had often stood alone, wondering why certain dreams refused to disappear. Every location seemed to answer a question they had carried for far too long. The truth became impossible to ignore. They had spent months convincing themselves they were simply remembering pleasant moments, but now they recognized something deeper. They weren't holding on to memories because they feared moving forward, they were holding on to them because those memories pointed toward a future they still hoped could exist. That realization didn't make them emotional in a dramatic way. Instead, it brought a quiet confidence they had never experienced before. Their thoughts became clearer than ever. If they truly wanted to build something meaningful, they could no longer wait for the perfect sign or the perfect circumstance. They would eventually have to trust what their own heart had already been whispering all along. Yet before they could take that first real step, one completely unexpected conversation unfolded with someone who noticed the change in their expression almost instantly. The question they were asked seemed ordinary at first, but the answer your soulmate gave would become one of the most honest things they had ever spoken aloud. The conversation began with a simple smile and a casual greeting, but within minutes it turned into something far more meaningful. "You seem different today," the other person quietly observed. "Something good happened, didn't it?" Your soulmate looked down for a brief second, almost laughing at how impossible it felt to explain. How could they describe a night that hadn't given them certainty but had given them clarity? How could they explain that the biggest change wasn't something they had seen, it was something they had finally accepted? After a thoughtful pause, they answered with complete honesty. "I finally stopped pretending that someone isn't important to me." The word surprised even them, because speaking them aloud made everything feel wonderfully real. There was no dramatic applause. No extraordinary event followed. Just a peaceful silence that somehow confirmed they had spoken the truth. As they continued walking, their steps felt lighter than they had in months. Yet one final piece remained hidden. There was still something they had prepared only for you, something they had never shared with anyone else. It wasn't written in a message. It wasn't spoken during that conversation. It had been quietly waiting since that unforgettable night, and when the moment finally arrives for those words to be revealed, every unanswered question from the beginning of this story will suddenly fall into place in a way neither of you could have imagined. Just when it seemed the story had finally settled into quiet certainty, another unexpected moment gently reshaped everything. Later that evening, your soulmate returned home and placed their phone on the table without unlocking it. Instead of rushing through the rest of the day, they sat beside the window, watching the last light disappear beyond the horizon. It reminded them of that unforgettable night, the one they have been trying to explain ever since. They closed their eyes and replayed every detail with remarkable clarity: the unanswered question, the empty chair across the cafe table, the message they almost sent, and the promise they silently made before sunrise. Then something unexpected happened. They began. If this story has kept you wondering what your own heart might be holding on to, consider sharing it with someone who enjoys meaningful stories like this, and if you'd like to hear how it all unfolds, staying connected for the next chapter means you won't miss the final pieces of this remarkable journey. Because the next realization arrived only minutes later, and it answered a question that had remained hidden since the very beginning. They walked over to a small shelf where old keepsakes had quietly gathered over time: concert tickets, handwritten notes, photographs, and little reminders that most people would have forgotten. One by one, they picked them up, smiling at memories that had once seemed ordinary. Yet among them was something that instantly stopped them in their tracks. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply an object connected to a conversation they once shared with you, a conversation that had felt casual at the time but now carried completely different meaning. Holding it in their hands, they realized that the moments people often overlook are the ones that quietly shape an entire future. They remembered your laughter more vividly than they remembered the words themselves. They remembered the pause before you answered a question, the way you noticed little details other people ignored, and the calm feeling that somehow followed every conversation. Those memories no longer felt like scattered pieces from the past. They fit together like scenes from a story they hadn't fully understood until now. Your soulmate smiled. Not because everything had become easy, but because they finally recognized that some connections grow stronger in silence before they ever find their voice. Yet one final discovery still waited for them, hidden where they least expected it, and that discovery would become the reason they knew they could no longer leave this story unfinished. Before the night came to an end once again, they unlocked their phone with a calm confidence that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. They didn't rush. They didn't second-guess every word the way they had before. Instead, they opened a blank note and began writing, not a message they intended to send immediately, but a letter that captured everything they wished you could know. They wrote about the ordinary moments that suddenly felt extraordinary because of you. They wrote about the lessons hidden inside silence, about discovering that courage sometimes arrives quietly instead of all at once, and about realizing that the most meaningful journeys often begin long before anyone notices them. Line after line, the truth became clearer. The night they had been trying to explain wasn't unforgettable because of what happened around them. It was unforgettable because it changed what was happening within them. And as they reached the final sentence, they paused, smiled, and whispered, "The next time our paths cross, I won't leave anything unsaid." They closed the note without deleting a single word, knowing the moment to share it was drawing closer with every passing day. But one final chapter remains, because the first opportunity to turn those heartfelt words into reality is about to appear, and when it does, you'll finally understand why your soulmate wanted you to listen until the very end. The opportunity arrived more quietly than anyone could have imagined. There were no flashing signs, no perfectly arranged circumstances, and no dramatic coincidence waiting around the corner. It began with an ordinary morning that looked almost identical to hundreds of others. Yet your soulmate woke with a feeling they couldn't ignore. Instead of asking themselves whether they should finally speak, they found themselves asking a completely different question. If I stay silent one more time, what memory will I regret years from now? That single thought followed them throughout the day. It appeared while they waited for coffee. It returned during simple conversations that barely held their attention. It lingered while they watched strangers rushing through life without realizing how quickly meaningful moments can disappear. For the first time, they understood that fear had never truly been protecting them. It had only been postponing the happiness they secretly hoped to find. Every step forward now felt lighter because they were no longer chasing certainty. They were choosing honesty. And somewhere deep inside, they sensed that honesty has a remarkable way of finding the people who are meant to hear it. Stay with this final stretch of the journey, because one quiet decision made before sunset would become the beginning of everything they had wanted to tell you since that unforgettable night. As the afternoon faded into evening, your soulmate found themselves standing in a familiar place where countless memories seemed to rise all at once. The breeze carried the same gentle calm they remembered from that life-changing night, yet everything felt different because they were different. They reached into their pocket and found the folded note they had written only for you. Carefully unfolding it, they read every line once more. Not to correct the words, but to make sure each sentence still reflected the truth in their heart. To their surprise, nothing needed changing. Every emotion remained exactly as it had been written. They smiled, folded the paper again, and realized something remarkable. The note had never been about finding perfect words. It had been about finding the courage to stop hiding behind unfinished thoughts. They imagined the moment they would finally share those feelings, not with grand speeches or impossible promises, but through simple honesty that asked for nothing except understanding. In that moment, the weight they had carried for so long quietly disappeared. They weren't waiting for destiny to decide anymore. They were ready to take the next step themselves. And just before leaving that familiar place, one final thought crossed their mind. A thought so genuine that it instantly became the heart of everything they wished you could know. If our story deserves another chapter, they whispered softly, I want that chapter to begin with truth. Those words stayed with them long after the evening sky filled with stars. They realized the unforgettable night they had been trying to explain was never really about a single event. It was about discovering that the strongest connections are often built through patience, quiet understanding, and the courage to finally speak from the heart. Looking upward, they smiled with a peaceful confidence that hadn't existed before. They no longer wondered whether their feelings were real. They no longer questioned whether the memories mattered. Every unanimous